Louisiana Supreme Court today giving the green light for St. George to become its own city with its own services and its own schools. Many in Baton Rouge were opposed to the plan, fighting for years to block it.
So we've actually done a couple of different videos, for those of you who remember, on the newly created Louisiana city, which is the 5th largest city in the state of Louisiana, which is St. George. And as discussed in said previous videos, this all actually started when the residents of what is now St. George just wanted to have their own school district that they can control. And the reason for this is because the East Baton Rouge School District is not only one of the worst school districts in the state of Louisiana, but it's actually one of the worst school districts in the entire country. And the thing is, it was actually told to these different people who went to the parish, tried to do it the proper way, that it would actually be much easier for them to form their own city rather than form their own school district. Now, of course, this might have been said in a very tongue-in-cheek way. This might have been said as a way to dismiss the concerns of the residents of what is now St. George, but guess what? These residents were not deterred, and after a lengthy fight, they were able to get it on the ballot for a vote. The ballot initiative was in fact approved, and then, of course, Baton Rouge, the city, decided that they were going to sue them because they didn't want these people, who were actually largely representative of the tax base of Baton Rouge, to be able to escape without actually paying significant penalties, and they didn't want them to have their own city at all. And this led to a number of black politicians and black pundits all over social media talking about how these were evil, white, racist, terrible people that were actually ruining Baton Rouge in the first place, but also they needed them, or they wanted them, to pay the taxes in Baton Rouge.
The vote of 17,000 now impacts 400,000 people who live in East Baton Rouge Parish because of the general fund. That's $1 billion of city parish money. 300 million of that is not dedicated. And they're going to take away $48 million of resources from the general fund in order to create this new municipality. So I don't really care if they go off and segregate themselves, but I do care that we've paid into the fortunes of that portion of town for the last 50 years. And to say that you're going to start a new community and then we owe you money for that community, well, we've been paying a whole lot for a long time, and we want our portion to be paid for if you're going to get it.
Because we have this weird circumstance where white people, you should leave, you're horrible and terrible, was the take, but then white people actually decided that they were going to leave, and all of these people ended up freaking out and losing their minds. Now, we are going to get into this latest development because it turns out, even though St. George won significant battles, established themselves as a new city, they now have a real mayor instead of an interim mayor, that the city of Baton Rouge is not quite done with them, and now they're trying to extort almost $400 million out of the residents of St. George in order to cover the school districts that they are leaving, in order to block them yet again from having their own school district, because it turns out it is in fact true that it's easier to form your own city than to have your own school district. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
That proposed school district in St. George is drawing some sharp criticism from the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board. Board members say the plan to create a new school system in St. George could have some serious consequences on the parish.
So in almost all of my videos where I've covered this story, I have mentioned the framing from the mainstream media, which is wealthy whites decide that they don't want to be in a city with black people, and they form their own white utopia or something of the sort. Again, we have headlines from all across these major news outlets claiming that it's wealthy whites, wealthy whites, wealthy whites, when in reality, it's actually much more nuanced than that, and I kind of play into it in a tongue-in-cheek way, because if you look at the demographics of the newly created St. George, while you do have a majority of white residents, you actually have a significant black population. And so in reality, this is just the media spinning the narrative because they don't want the black Democratic majority in Baton Rouge that existed previous to lose control over their tax base. And by the way, even the wealthy whites is significantly exaggerated. These are just just middle class, maybe some upper middle class white people that largely came up with this idea. So the left, make no mistake about it, is making this a race issue, but the people of the newly created St. George have said time and time again that this is about the schools. However, they've run into a new roadblock in the creation of their school district.
Measures, both which rely on each other, create a new school district and organize how the district will split from East Baton Rouge Parish schools operating independently.
Quite honestly, I think that the bill authors are very well aware that they have not worked through the very key details of that bill.
EBR parent Caitlin Joshua says the plan presented leaves the East Baton Rouge School District in a deficit and without a clear plan for legacy costs.
You see, they have two companion bills. Both of them need to pass in order to create the district. However, what ended up happening at the East Baton Rouge School Board was they essentially passed a rule to preempt the creation of this new St. George district. And the reason they were able to do that is because some of the residents of the newly created St. George that have their kids in specialized magnet schools want their kids to be able to maintain their enrollment in those magnet schools, even if they're going to be covered by East Baton Rouge's school district.
The East Baton Rouge Parish School Board tonight is demanding changes to two bills that will create and regulate a school system within the new city of St. George. According to School Board President Shoshone Stewart, the current legislation places an unfair burden on the rest of the parish, and she says the board's concerns are not being heard. The board approved a resolution at a special meeting.
It's not a working partnership.
One of the board's biggest concerns is language in the bills that would allow students in St. George to enroll in EBR's magnet programs. Stewart also argues that the bills fail to address St. George's share of millions of dollars in retiree health care costs.
Now look, I've actually examined the arguments and the rationale from both parties in this particular case, the East Baton Rouge School District that currently exists, and of course the newly created or soon to be newly created St. George School District, because I wanted to give you guys a fair assessment of both sides of the argument. But the thing is, one of these actors is obviously acting in bad faith. Again, if we're talking about the president of the East Baton Rouge School District, these are the very people that made it so difficult for control to be in the hands of the residents of St. George in the first place, that the city actually exists as a consequence of them trying to suppress that section of the voters. And the thing is, it would be reasonable for them to say at the school district that, hey, if you're going to have some of your magnet students still enrolled in our school district, then your city is going to have to compensate us for that to some degree. You can't just blow a hole in our budget and then walk away with your new city, even though that's definitely what you would want to do. But the thing is, the numbers are wildly out of proportion. If you look at what they're asking for, it's about $300 million to be paid to the school district that they're largely departing from and creating their new school district in response to.
Members said the current legislation would leave EBR to pay about $359 million for teacher health insurance and retirement costs.
And that represents nearly half of the budget of East Baton Rouge's schools, which is in and around $800 million, again, to cover this group of students. So you're going to ask them to pay nearly half when the population of Baton Rouge is over 200,000 residents and the population of St. George is 86,000 residents. That just does not seem to add up. Those numbers don't seem to square. And the reason why they're trying to do this is because despite all the rhetoric about the evil white wealthy racists that are forming their own city, that are fleeing, that honestly we don't even need them because those white people were holding back the black utopia that was going to be Baton Rouge, they are the tax base. And this is more similar to the proportions that they were paying prior to departing from East Baton Rouge than anything proportional to the population or the amount of students that are actually attending these schools. And this is the little game that they're trying to play over at the school board.
St. George City wanted better options. So if better options were wanted, then why stay a part of EBR.
And again, in a very bad faith way, they decided to declare to the media that they're not having a partnership with St. George, and they passed a bill essentially as a poison pill in order to destroy the school district, which again, they've been trying to fight for well over a decade. I understand that people want to say democracy and, oh, that was the city's construction before, so majority rules, but they've already voted. These people have already left. They've already taken this fight up to the courts multiple times. They've already won those fights, and yet Baton Rouge is still trying to force them to pay. They're still trying to extract money from these white people who, again, they describe as evil white racists. Now, of course, I have pointed out time and time again that the demographic population of the newly created St. George is not as white as is being advertised by many of the black activists that are hating on this particular new city. Again, there is a significant black population. But in reality, what these people at the school board are trying to do, or at least what it appears they're trying to do, is punish absolutely everyone in the new school district, try to tank them in any way possible because they don't want St. George to prove to be a success. Because what if a bunch of other municipalities, what if a bunch of other neighborhoods end up fleeing, end up breaking off? That would obviously decrease their power, decrease their budgets. And of course, these politicians don't want that outcome above any other outcome. To hell with the kids, to hell with if they get a better education or not. This can't succeed because other people might do this. And by the way, St. George actually has some good arguments. There are other unincorporated districts in and around this area that have actually formed their own school district, and they've been able to do so without a crazy penalty, despite the fact that some of the kids that live in those districts actually attend the magnet schools in question that we're talking about. Now, to be fair to the East Baton Rouge School Board, they do have a response for that. They do have a retort, and that is the size and scope of St. George as compared to those other unincorporated districts.
St. George leaders say they want to fashion their school district in the same way Baker, Zachary, and Central did. What's the difference between that, Baker, Central, and Zachary?
Well, the biggest difference is the size, right? Baker, Central, and Zachary, if you add all of those cities or municipalities up together, they still would equal the size of St. George. You know, when you look at St. George right now, if I'm not mistaken, it is the 5th largest city in the state of Louisiana. That's a major fiscal impact up on the East Baton Rouge Parish school system.
So one of the things that I've taken note of in the past in connection to these stories is the fact that we have a totally different perspective on the creation of this new city, depending on if you're on the Baton Rouge side or if you're on the St. George side. And a perfect example of this is how this information is being communicated to us through the local news. You have the president of the school board, who of course is taking a preemptive action to block a provision that may appear in the final draft of the bill to create the St. George School District. And she's talking about how, oh, they're not working with us. They're not willing to work with us. We told them what we needed. We told them how much money we actually wanted. And they're just doing whatever as if they formed their own city, as if they completed a 10-year legal battle in order to do so. And that is absolutely unacceptable to us.
The attempt initially when we sat down was to work together, but we hadn't been working together because the things that we've asked for have not been added into that bill.
Then you flip, you contrast to a representative from St. George, and he's like, yeah, look, we want to work with them. We're totally fine working out a deal in terms of the revenue, in terms of what we need to pay in order to keep those kids in those magnet schools, but we do want to form our own school district. The entire basis of this city has been us wanting to form our own school district, so we're going to move forward on that.
Senator Rick Edmonds is one of the leaders behind the bills. He says he has communicated with the board and is open to compromise.
We're working with members of the school board, receiving some of their information, and we're trying to work through the process, and I'll continue to work with anybody that wants the opportunity to speak on this issue.
As for the concerns about magnet program access, Edmonds says he supports school choice and believes both communities can benefit.
We're trying to do our very best to offer the most choice for all of our families in both St. George and EBR. We think there's wins for both sides. for us to work together. I'm going to look into what their issues are, and we'll work our way through the process.
And in reality, even though it is clear and obvious that Baton Rouge is not a nice partner, is not somebody who actually genuinely wants to work with the newly created St. George, they're so positive in the way that they talk about their new city. And this has been a feature of St. George from the jump. Again, I show you the victory speech of the St. George campaign after they won their battle in court, and they're very optimistic about the idea that they could basically imagine anything because they're starting from zero.
Whether you were for St. George or you were against St. George, now is your opportunity, a historic opportunity, to create a city from the beginning, from the ground up. It's your ideas, it's your policies, it's your way of life, and now you can come together and put those out there and have someone accountable to you. No longer accountable to some people off in the city of Baton Rouge or somewhere else in the parish. No, they're going to be accountable to you, your neighbors, your friends, and your coworkers. So when you have your ideas, whether, again, you're against us or for us, bring them. Let's create a better city. Let's work together. Let's move past this. Because as Chris alluded to, we're not done. We're just getting started. And now you got a time to be there and be a part of it. I do want to thank the legal team. They have endured so much to get to this process. They've heard all this negativity all along the way in the press and from opposing counsel. They deserve recognition for their efforts to stay the course.
Now, by contrast, what do we always hear from the Baton Rouge side? Oh, these people are evil, white, and racist. Oh, they've taken so much money out of the system. Honestly, we don't even want to give them their portion of the money that every city gets based on their population from the parish because they don't deserve it. And we don't really need these people. They're absolutely disgusting, evil, white, racists. But also, we do need these people. We need their money. Please give us the money, as Anna Kasparian would say.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Because we were already not building a functioning city in Baton Rouge before these people decided to leave. And again, this is another perfect distillation of why you want to break away. And if I were the people of East St. George, if I were their representatives, I would genuinely consider not having those kids be enrolled in the magnet schools if they're going to force you to pay nearly half of the cost of the school district that you actually created a whole city in order to leave. Now again, this appears to be almost universally true, the actual attitude that we're getting from the Baton Rouge side of the equation, except for one specific activist that I always want to take note of, who represented the NAACP in Louisiana, who said, listen, I didn't want them to break off and form their own city, but in reality, we live in a democracy and the people of St. George had every right to do so. Except for that one person, that one black activist, it seems like universally it's always, we don't want you here, we don't really want to work with you, we want to stymie everything that you're going to do, but also give us the money, pay our bills, pay for our people, because you were our entire tax base. Now, of course, I want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. What do you think about the creation of St. George? What do you think about a largely white majority city forming right next to a much more famous and historic and now largely black city? And what city do you think will be more successful? Remember, Baton Rouge actually has double the population advantage as compared to St. George, so the numbers maybe per capita might be better in St. George, but overall, maybe without all those evil white racists filled with evil white racism, we might see the utopia that Baton Rouge is actually told to us could definitely be by all these activists who say that the white people should leave and we hate them and we don't want them here, but also they need to pay for everything. Again, all your thoughts down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Baton Rouge battling against St. George. Till next time.